I know, that's a good pour. Part of me is quite sad that I'm not going to get to see them again. Here's something a little bit different. They present with GAD, so that's generalised anxiety disorder. It's also given me some extra money, which I won't lie has been really nice and really helpful, especially these days. So lots of people have asked me for this video, no pressure on me. What is it actually like being a therapist? What do we actually do? How do we spend our time? What sort of things do we think about before our sessions? What do we think about after our sessions? Are we still thinking about the person we've just seen, or are we thinking about what to have for dinner? What do we do when we're not doing therapy? Do we have lives outside of being a therapist? Well, there's one way to find out. Allow me to let you into my life, just for a little while. I mean, I'm not the world's best therapist. I don't know everything. But this is how I do it, and it appears to be working relatively well so far. So I thought this video might be interesting for two sets of people. Firstly, people who are considering accessing therapy and they're not sure what it's like. Maybe they've never met a therapist before. Maybe they've only seen therapy on TV and thinks that's what it will be like. And I'll be talking about some different ways that therapy can be delivered. So I offer face-to-face therapy with adolescents through a CAM service who are usually experiencing developmental trauma. And I also offer online therapy to adults via text chat, or sometimes called teletherapy, through a service that offers online therapy called IESO. The second set of people who might be interested in watching this are people who are perhaps thinking about careers as a therapist. So whether that's thinking of becoming a PWP or a high intensity CBT therapist, maybe you're an aspiring clinical psychologist and haven't quite made it onto the course yet and are exploring other options within the therapy world. Well, this should give you some insight into what sort of things you could be doing. I think it's quite surprising the broad range of opportunities there are for CBT therapists out there once you start looking, whether that's within the NHS, whether it's within the private sector, or whether it's working for yourself. So follow me around for the next few days or so and see what you think. If you like what you see, leave a comment down below. If you want to see something specific in the next video, any part of my day, any part of my job, any specific questions like how on earth do you balance all of this, Stu? Drop me a comment and I'll make sure I include that in the next video. Let's go. I think the rain stopped actually. It's good timing because I've got an appointment in an hour and 10 minutes, but I've got some work I need to do before that, and it's going to take me 50 minutes to get to that appointment. So let's get a shift on. Bye piggies, see you later. So that's me done with that young person. Got some mixed emotions. Part of me is quite sad that I'm not going to get to see them again and hear about their successes and what they've been up to and how they've utilised some of the skills and techniques we've learnt in our sessions and how they've put to use some of the things we've discussed around how they relate to people and also how they view themselves. Now that's a really nice part of being someone's therapist, is hearing the impact that you're having on their lives. But I'm also happy and pleased that we've come to the end and they feel ready to move on with their life without me. They feel like they're in a place that they can do that because of the work that we have done together. And I love that. That's what makes the job so worthwhile. I think what I'll do, I want to give you some more context around this person and the type of work we've done so you can have an understanding of the work that we've done together. I'm going to go and grab a coffee first, I think, after that, because it took me 40 minutes to get here. I've just had an hour session. I need to get a drink of some sort. Yeah, let's catch up later. Hello, Daisy. I'm back. Did I hear on the way here that Matt Smith is in House of the Dragon? Love Matt Smith. Loved him in Doctor Who. One of my favourites, probably. Anyway, so a bit more context around this. They were referred to me because their key worker was concerned that they were presenting with signs of developmental trauma. Now, developmental trauma isn't a clinical diagnosis. It's a lens through which we can describe someone's history and their experience. And it's very much asking that question of what happened to you as opposed to what's wrong with you. I'm being quite cautious here of confidentiality. So I'm purposely being quite vague and not giving too much away, and I'm changing some of the details as well. So don't go trying to find out who this is. So there were questions whether this person had... Whoa, Stu. What? Be careful, mate. What for? You're giving too much away. Okay, when I was watching this back, I realised that I might have gotten a bit carried away with what I was sharing. And that came from a place of excitement and passion of how well this young person had done, how hard they had worked, and how successful and life-changing our work together had been. However, the person always comes first. Protecting their confidentiality, protecting their identity must come first. And it's really important to keep a high level of trust and safety, not just in me, but in any therapist they might work with in the future. And I'm not going to jeopardize that. So I've deleted that part of the video I made, and I'm going to talk a bit more generally about things here. So developmental trauma can cause difficulties in several areas such as sensory development, dissociation, attachment development, emotion regulation, behavioural regulation, cognition, and in identity development. And sometimes these difficulties can be quite difficult to unpick from other causes, as there's a lot of overlap, such as with neurodevelopmental disorders such as ADHD, ASC, or speech and language disorders. And we need some way to try and work out the best way we can help this person. And one way we can do this, and I'm not saying this is the right way or the only way, but it's a way, is to step outside the world of diagnostic criteria. And remember, developmental trauma is not a diagnosis, and we can focus purely on the needs of that person and offer intervention around that. But on the flip side of that, having a formal diagnosis can be helpful sometimes in accessing other services or accessing support. And from my experience, the person themselves sometimes find a diagnostic label helpful as a way to explain their experience. Whereas other times, the person themselves aren't too concerned with a particular label, they just want the help. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that everyone is different. Everyone has different needs, everyone has different perspectives on things. So it's down for us to work with that person in the way that suits them best. So part of my job is to take a comprehensive history from that person, from their parents or carers, find out what they're like in different environments, such as what they're like at home, what they're like with their friends, what they're like at school, and then make a decision how we can move forward. In this case, after talking to them and the system around them, so parents, carers, teachers, social workers, we decided to treat some obvious trauma from their past first to see what impact that might have on those other areas I spoke about earlier. Right, back to Stu from earlier. And they indicated that they wanted to talk about their experience. They wanted to talk about what they'd been through, but they were too scared to. And that's really common. We naturally avoid the things that cause us distress. I mean, if we think about being scared of dogs, then we naturally avoid going to dog parks. Or if a dog approaches us, we turn away or we change direction. Well, it's the same for our internal experiences, so experiences in our body or in our mind. And as soon as our mind turns to that distressing thought or memory or image, we turn away from it. Well, just as we would do with dogs, instead of turning away from that distress, we turn towards it, we lean into it. Not all at once, not too much, not so much that it's overwhelming. We take small steps toward it. So with dogs, we might start with pictures of dogs, and then videos of dogs, and then be some distance away from a real dog on a lead. Well, with internal experiences, we're not going to go straight to the worst bit, the most distressing part. We can build up to it, and we can balance the time in that experience with the severity of the experience. So we made the decision after some psychoeducation to use EMDR as our intervention of choice. And EMDR, we can use a technique called CPOS, which stands for Constant Installation of Present Orientation and Safety, where we spend a short period of time, maybe a few seconds only, in the memory, and then we step back into the present by doing something like moving ourselves or blowing a feather around and trying to catch it. So something to ground us and bring us back in before going back into that memory. And we can do something similar with ACT, such as the dipping in and out of the river exercise, where we spend some time in the memory and then come back to the present. And really, in pretty much, well, maybe that's wrong, in most trauma interventions, there is some element of having one foot in the past and one foot in the present, and be able to process what happened and feel safe whilst doing so. So we spend a lot of sessions processing. And something that's really interesting in EMDR is we look for spontaneous change in behaviour. So in CBT, we might set some form of behavioural experiment to do in between sessions, whereas in EMDR, we let the processing do its thing and we stand back and get out of its way. And what was really interesting with this person is they spontaneously started socialising more. They met a new group of friends, they started going into town for literally the first time in years, and where they used to get overwhelmed by this sensory experience, that too slowly started to reduce. And we also spent some time thinking about their future, working on values and what kind of person they want to be and what they want to stand for, and some time spent on relationships and practical problem solving skills. And today was our last session. So where have we left things? There have been massive improvements all around. So since we started, this person has not displayed any harmful coping strategies, which they had used before to try and make attachments with people. They are now back in full-time school. They've got a new friendship group. They're socializing more. They're getting far less overwhelmed. Less overwhelmed? That doesn't sound right. They are far better in situations with loud noises. Their eye contact is what would probably be regarded as normal or appropriate. And I've done a few joint sessions with the adults currently in their life, so they have a better understanding of some of the trauma presentation that this person has, such as dissociation, and what to do during those moments to help orient that person back to the present. And this was all done in collaboration with that person and the adults in their life. So in our previous session, so the one before this one, and in today's session, we did some of what I guess we could call relapse prevention. So that involves looking through our sessions, identifying what was the most helpful and what they had learned. And we were thinking about situations which might be difficult and challenging and how they could get through them in the future. What resources could they call upon? Who could they turn to? That kind of thing. And that was it. Now, there is a transition plan in place, so please don't worry that this person is having all of this intensive intervention and then being left to it. I would never let that happen. So I have those notes to type up. That's going to take me a little while because it's an ending session. And then we're going to move on to the next part of my day. What's that, Daisy? If people are enjoying this content, they should like and subscribe to the channel and maybe leave a comment. What a fantastic idea. So just check this out quickly. It's the school holidays at the moment, so my children are at holiday club, but my youngest daughter made me this to keep me company. It's a unicorn, as you can obviously tell by the horn at the top, but this is going to keep me company for the day. I can talk to it, I guess, when I'm not talking to you guys. And yeah, I like it. Nice little thought. Right then. So here's something a little bit different. Oh, it's getting hot. Is it too hot for tea, do you think? In my life, it's never too hot for tea. My service has been considering using this virtual reality intervention, which aims to reduce knife crime. So why am I involved with this? Well, as a trauma-informed service, I've been asked to consider the impact of this from a trauma perspective and to think about whether this has a use in our service or not, and if it does, how do we facilitate this? What do we need to think about? So currently the police are using it and some schools are using it too, I believe. So I got invited to the latest round of training at the local police station to experience it and see what it's like. And I need to write my thoughts about it to the service manager. So there's lots of things I need to consider here. And ultimately it's not my decision, but they wanted a perspective of a therapist that has a background and specialises in trauma. So in essence, what happens here is people put on a virtual reality headset, a bit like an Oculus Rift or something similar, and they watch a 360-degree movie of an incident that involves a knife attack. And unfortunately, during the incident, a young man sadly passes away, and the viewer sees the impact of that through the eyes of lots of different people involved. So there's paramedics, there's a surgeon, there's the victim's mum and dad, there's the person who did the stabbings, mum saying how she has now lost a son as well. There's a perspective of them being alone in a police cell with their thoughts, and the whole thing's very emotive. And everyone I spoke to picked out something different that affected them the most. And then after that, there's a group discussion about the impact of the film and any comments people have and any kind of lessons learnt from it, whether it's changed their perspective. So there's a few things I need to consider with this. What's the evidence base? I've done a search of similar interventions used in communities elsewhere, so I've had a look around at that. I've also looked at the evidence base for virtual reality exposure therapy, VRET, and I know that's a different intervention, but that can give some ideas of the broader things to consider in terms of adverse effects, in terms of practicalities of delivering it. And I also need to consider the reactions that people might have when they watch this. Are they going to go into fight or flight mode? Are they going to freeze? Are they going to dissociate? And if they do, what are we going to do about it? Or what is the facilitator going to do about it? And how much of the viewer's past do we need to know? Do we need to know about any previous adverse experiences that might be triggered when watching this? Do we know what strategies they have at home? So I need to collate all of my thoughts into a document and send that off to the service manager, and then be prepared to answer any questions that might come up from that document. Oh man, there's loads of planes flying over. And a helicopter. And another plane. I've got about an hour now, and then I've got some ISO work. And the kids are probably going to be home soon. I imagine they will instantly tell me that they are hungry, despite having eaten just before they've come home. They seem to be hungry every 5 minutes these days. So what is ISO? I'm not even sure if I'm saying that right, to be honest. ISO. Let me have a look. So ISO is not in the dictionary, so I can't get my phone to pronounce it. I know what I can do.
ISO Digital Health.
Okay, so ISO is right. I've been saying it right for the 3 years I've been working. So IESO is an online therapy service that provides text-based CBT. So if you've ever used iMessage on your iPhone, I'm not sure if Android has an equivalent, then it's a bit like that. So it's a text session where you can see when each other are typing something. You kind of get the three little dots as you do with iMessage, and it's quite similar to how a face-to-face session is conducted. And what is really cool is they only see and treat NHS patients. They aren't one of these companies demanding your hard-earned cash to be seen kind of outside the system. So there's no cost to the person accessing the service at all. It's really flexible in terms of timings, it's accessible, all you need is a device that connects to the internet, and it offers this unique experience of being able to message the therapist in between sessions. And that's a really interesting way for me to work as a therapist, is I can have some contact with the client in between sessions. So if they need to clarify anything, if they ask me to repeat something that I might have said in the session and they've forgotten, well, I guess they could access the transcript for that. But they could send me a message and ask me. If they've successfully completed a task they were going to do in between sessions, then they can let me know in advance. That helps me think about my next session with them and plan and prepare for that. I think it's a really, really unique part of the service, and I really like it. I like this type of work. It's not only flexible for the client, but it's also really flexible for me. I don't often have sessions in the evening straight after my CAMS role, but I'm in this strange transition phase this month where I've been doing CAMS full time for the last 12 months to cover someone who's been off. My usual CAMS days are 3 days a week, and then I would work with IESO for 2 days a week. So since my CAMS work has been full time, I've been doing evening work, and I'm now starting to shift across back to daytime work, maybe with a little bit of work in the evening too. But like I said, it's really flexible. That's worked really well for me. I love the difference in the work helping adults with anxiety, depression, OCD, PTSD, phobias, sleep problems, social anxiety, stress, compared with CAMS, which is predominantly developmental trauma. So I get a really good mix of work. It's also given me some extra money, which I won't lie has been really nice and really helpful, especially these days. So let's go back in, have a chat about how I'm going to prepare for the session. I can do the session and then we can have a quick chat about it afterwards. Come on. So here at this desk, I do both my IESO and my PhD work. It just saves me from constantly unplugging and plugging in devices. When I do that, it tends to mess up all the windows that I've arranged in the way that I like them arranged. And yes, I know this is a luxury. I've spent a fair amount of cash on this. It's cash that I've made for working for IESO and that I've saved. But for me, the quality of life advantages are well worth it. So I need to spend about 10 minutes preparing for my session. I will look over the notes from the last session, and one of the cool things I can do with IESO is I can read the entire transcript of my last session or previous sessions if I need to. And I'm about to do an online texting session with this person. It's our third session we've had. They present with GAD, so that's generalized anxiety disorder, and that is where someone has persistent anxiety and worry over a wide range of situations. And I'm going to try and help them using acceptance and commitment therapy, which sits under the umbrella of cognitive behaviour therapies. So something that's interesting in ACT, and that I talk a lot more about in my video called What Are Values in Acceptance and Commitment Therapy, is that we don't aim specifically for symptom reduction. Symptom reduction isn't the key goal or outcome of the intervention. The key outcome is to get the person to live a more meaningful life. However, we often find that by living a more meaningful life, that symptom reduction occurs as a consequence of that. But check out my video, it's really helpful if you don't really understand what I've just said. So, like I said, this is the third session I'm having with this person. In the first session, we spent some time explaining the system, how IESO works, explaining some of the differences between face-to-face and text. Things such as, I can't see that person, so I need them to be able to tell me what they're experiencing in the session. I can't tell if they're becoming distressed because of something we're talking about. I can't tell if they are becoming angry because of something we're talking about. So I need them to tell me, and I can do that. I can ask them as we're going on through the session. I can say, how are you feeling right now? Are you okay with talking about this? But usually after a couple of sessions, I can pick up on whether something isn't right with that person. And by that, I don't mean something isn't right. I mean that a question hasn't sat well, or they're thinking, or they've become distressed. Because just like when you have a conversation with someone, there are tells in the text. There are differences in how someone responds. For example, responses might be really short, yes and no answers, if they feel distressed about a topic, whereas usually they would answer in paragraphs. So the second session, we spent exploring the problem that they wanted to get help with. So we get some more social context and find out what they're currently doing to try to help their problem. And the person doesn't have to tell me any of those things. I'm not going to force them to tell me, if they've got a family, if they've got kids, what they do for work. But personally, I find it helpful for me to get an idea of what's going on in that person's life. What responsibilities do they have? Who's important and meaningful to them in their lives? Do they have kind of stress and pressure at work? To just build up a picture of what the person's life is like. So coming into this session, my loose plan in my head is to establish some goals for therapy. And I say it's a loose plan, as the plan is always collaborative between me and them. So there might be something that the person wants to bring to this session and specifically talk about that ends up taking the whole session. But ideally, I really want to establish some goals for therapy at this point, because then we have established how the service and the system works. We will have established the presenting problem, so what the person is struggling with. We will have established some of the things that are maintaining that problem or keeping that problem going, and we would have figured out what the person wants out of our therapy sessions. What would successful therapy look like to them? And for the first 3 sessions, I think those are good things to aim for. Those are good things to kind of hit to be able to move on from session 4 and onwards. And of course, this isn't set in stone. We don't always aim for this in 3 sessions. Sometimes it takes longer. Sometimes it can be a little bit quicker. So it all depends on how the person's presenting. And the last thing we want to do is rush people through this. This is talking about these things are a very important part of the therapeutic process within itself. So we don't rush. We make sure we get everything that we need, and we explore this with the person. So we're done. Session ended, notes written up. Notes took about 10 minutes straight after the session. Fresh in my mind, all done. So something quite common that came out of this session is that people often have the goal of, I don't want to feel anxious anymore, or I don't want to worry anymore. And these are what we call emotional goals. So the goal is to feel a certain way. But in ACT, we don't have goals like this. Remember, the aim is to live a more meaningful life. So we try and translate these emotional goals into behavioural goals. So instead of how I want to feel, we have what I want to do. So when someone says, I don't want to feel anxious anymore, we can reframe that goal as maybe we can learn some new skills to handle this anxiety more effectively. And then we can ask, so if you are able to do that, what would you be doing differently in your life? How would day to day be different to you? This is kind of like that magic wand question that you hear quite often. It's along the similar lines. And that can open up the conversation around living a more meaningful life and what does that look like. And we also identified in this session another regular occurrence, which is keeping busy on purpose to distract from unpleasant or distressing thoughts. So this is a behavior which actually maintains the anxiety. And when I asked this person what happens to the worry or anxiety when they distract themselves, they said, well, it goes down. But soon it comes back. So long term, it isn't a successful strategy. And also constantly trying to distract yourself, constantly trying to find things to do when you don't really want to do them is absolutely tiring. It's fatiguing. And there are other techniques that people use to get rid of unwanted thoughts and feelings that I look out for. I like to use the mnemonic DOTS, so DOTS, that's distraction, which we've just kind of talked about, opting out, so that's another term for avoidance, thinking strategies such as trying to push thoughts out of your head or trying to challenge thoughts and debate them, and the S is for substances, so drinking alcohol or taking drugs to try and escape those distressing or unwanted thoughts and feelings. And all of those are behaviours that actually maintain the problem in the long term. They can be quite effective in the short term. People can get a bit of relief from anxiety or from worry or from images in their head or from memories. But in the long term, it doesn't work. And we need to draw the person's attention to that because all of those behaviours are understandable. No one particularly wants to have distressing thoughts or horrible memories and images in their head. So we would want to get rid of that stuff. That makes complete sense. That's what we've done in that session. We identified some goals. We identified what we kind of mean by goals as well. So behavioral goals. That's been set as the person's in between session work for them to go away, have a think about what those behavioural goals look like, have a think about what their life would look like if they had better ways to manage their anxiety, manage their worry, if they weren't spending so much time worrying, if they weren't sitting on the sofa getting lost in thoughts, getting lost in what if questions, what would they be doing instead? How would they be spending that time? What more meaningful and valuable things are in their lives that they could be focusing on instead? So they're going to consider those things, and then in the next few sessions we're going to look at some ways of how the person can get some distance from those thoughts so they don't have as much power over them and can engage in those more meaningful activities. So that was an hour session. That's me done for the evening. I'm going to put the kids to bed, and then I'm going to think about doing another hour of PhD work. I usually try to get an hour in an evening. It doesn't always happen. Usually by the end of the day, I'm pretty tired, and I'm going to have to figure out some way to edit this video because, you know, I'm not a videographer in any way. My editing skills are very basic. It takes me a long time to do any of it. So I'm going to go and probably try and do some work on that as well. So the PhD can probably wait. Don't tell my supervisor. Cool. Let's have an ending scene. Well, that's some bits of my work today. I can't talk about everything I've done, otherwise this will be the longest vlog in the world. This has been a bit of a test to whether I can practically film this whilst working, a test to see if anyone is actually interested in watching this kind of vlog or this kind of content. I know there's things I can improve on, or maybe more appropriate things for me to talk about or that people want me to talk about and show. Feel free to let me know. Perhaps in future vlogs I could talk more about clients, or perhaps a couple of clients per vlog, such as how they're presenting and what I've done, or a couple of things in my day that might be interesting to you, things that are a little bit different. So please comment below and let me know. So that's me signing off for the day. Take care.